My family thought banning me from Thanksgiving was the ultimate punishment for finally closing my wallet, but they forgot one crucial detail that would ruin their lives. Every credit card they swiped, every savings account they drained, and the very roof over their heads was legally mine, and I was finally done paying for people who only loved me when the check cleared. The suitcase on my bed was half full, a chaotic mix of blazers, silk blouses, and the specific kind of anxiety that only came from preparing for a high-stakes business trip. I was standing in the center of my apartment in Columbus, staring at a pair of heels, trying to decide if they were too aggressive for a boardroom full of tech investors, when my phone buzzed against the hardwood of my dresser. The screen lit up with a photo of my mother, Darla. It wasn't a flattering picture. She was mid-laugh at a barbecue 4 years ago, back when I still thought her laughter was warm rather than calculated. My stomach did that familiar, conditioned flip. It was the physical reaction of a daughter trained to be a first responder to crises she didn't create. I swiped answer, cradling the phone between my ear and shoulder as I folded a navy suit jacket. "Hey, Mom, I'm actually just packing for—" "Riley, we need $3,500. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the promotion I had mentioned last week, the one that had me working 80-hour weeks. She just launched the missile. I froze, the jacket suspended in my hands. The specific number rang alarm bells. It wasn't a round number like rent or a car note. It was a fix-it number. "What?" I asked, my voice flat. "Your brother," she sighed, the sound heavy with a performative exhaustion I knew too well. "Trent. He's in a bit of a bind. It's a misunderstanding, really. But if we don't pay this fine by Friday, they're going to issue a warrant. You know how the system is, Riley. They target boys like him." I closed my eyes, inhaling the scent of my lavender detergent, trying to ground myself. Trent wasn't a boy. He was 28 years old. And the system wasn't targeting him because of bad luck. It was targeting him because he refused to stop driving while intoxicated. This would be the third time I'd bailed him out in 18 months. "Mom," I said, finally dropping the jacket into the suitcase. "I can't." The silence on the other end was deafening. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. "You can't? Or you won't?" "I won't," I corrected, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was the first time I had ever said that word to her regarding money. I paid his rent last month. I paid for Dad's dental work in August. I paid Bree's tuition gap in June. I am tapped out, Mom, emotionally and financially. "You make 6 figures, Riley. Don't lie to me about being tapped out." Her voice sharpened, losing the weary mother act and revealing the blade underneath. "We are talking about your brother's freedom. You're the one who made it out. You're the one sitting in that high-rise while we're scraping by in Cincinnati. Have you forgotten where you came from?" "I haven't forgotten," I whispered, the hurt blooming in my chest like a bruise. "That's why I've sent you nearly 20 grand this year alone, but it never stops. Trent needs to figure this out." "So, you're turning your back on family?" "No, I'm setting a boundary." "Fine," she snapped. "If you can't support your own family, if you think you're too good to help us when we're drowning, then don't bother coming to Thanksgiving. Clearly, you don't want to be part of this family anyway." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, shaking. I expected the anger, but I didn't expect the sudden, jagged pain of rejection. Thanksgiving was my favorite holiday. It was the one day a year I deluded myself into thinking we were normal. I made the mac and cheese. I brought the expensive wine. I sat at the kids' table with my nieces and pretended I wasn't just a walking bank account. I told myself it was just heat-of-the-moment anger. She would cool down. Dad would call. Trent would text a half-assed apology. I went to sleep that night with a knot in my stomach, tossing and turning until the sun bled through the blinds of my Columbus apartment. I reached for my phone immediately, hoping for a missed call, an olive branch. Instead, I saw the group chat notification. The Family Circle Mom. Until Riley apologizes for disrespecting this family and turning her back on her brother, she is not welcome at our home for Thanksgiving. Dad: It's a shame it had to come to this, Riley. You've changed. Trent: Wow, imagine having it all and being that stingy. Don't worry about coming. We don't need your negative energy. Bree: Removed Riley from the family circle. Bree: Removed Riley from shared family album. I sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around my waist. They hadn't just uninvited me. They were performing an excision. They were cutting me out like a tumor. I stared at the screen, reading the messages over and over, waiting for the tears to come. I waited for the sobbing, the grief, the urge to call them and beg for forgiveness, to transfer the money just to make the hurting stop. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard realization settled over me. I looked at Trent's message again. We don't need your negative energy. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound in the empty apartment. They didn't need my energy? No, they needed my capital. My father's words echoed in my head. You've changed. He was right. I had changed. For years, I had handed over my credit card information because it was easier than fighting. I had set up the auto pay on the utilities at their house because I didn't want them to freeze in the winter. I had given Trent a groceries-only prepaid Visa because I wanted him to eat. I opened my banking app. The primary cardholder on the account my parents used for emergencies? Me. The account paying the mortgage interest? Me. The streaming services they were likely watching right now? Me. The cell phone plan they used to send those hateful messages? Me. They had banned me from the table, but they had forgotten who bought the groceries. They thought they were punishing a daughter, but they had just declared war on their landlord, their banker, and their safety net. I got out of bed, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen reflected in my eyes, cold and unyielding. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. If I'm not family, then I guess I'm just a creditor. I navigated to the credit card portal. My finger hovered over the mouse. Status: active. Click. Status: frozen. I didn't stop there. I went to the joint checking account where I deposited their allowance. I transferred every cent back into my personal savings. I went to the utility companies. Cancel autopay. Cancel autopay. Cancel autopay. If they wanted a Thanksgiving without Riley, they were going to have a Thanksgiving without power, without heat, and without a dime to buy a turkey. I sat back, my heart racing not with fear, but with adrenaline. The war had started. They just didn't know they had already lost. Have you ever broken your back for people who would break your heart the second you said no? If you have ever felt used, unappreciated, or manipulated by the very people who are supposed to protect you, you need to smash that like button right now. Subscribe and comment. I know your worth. Below, if you're tired of being everyone's doormat. Let's show the algorithm that we are done being victims. The silence lasted exactly 14 hours. That was how long it took for the reality of their new financial landscape to hit them. I was in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Columbus, pitching a logistics strategy to a client who actually respected my time when my phone screen lit up face up on the mahogany table. It wasn't a polite buzz. It was a barrage. Dad: Card declined at the gas station. Call the bank. Now. I slid the phone into my pocket, ignoring the vibration against my hip. I finished my presentation, shook hands, and walked back to my office with the poise of a woman who hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in her personal life. When I finally sat down and unlocked my screen, the notifications tumbled out in a desperate cascade. Mom, I'm at Kroger with a full cart. The cashier is staring at me. The card isn't working. Riley. Trent. Yo, Netflix is down. Says payment failed. Fix it. Bree. Why is my Uber account locked? I'm late for class. I stared at the messages, a cold smirk touching my lips. They weren't worried about me. They weren't asking why I had done it. They were annoyed that the service had been interrupted. It was the reaction of a tenant when the Wi-Fi goes out, not a family concerned about their daughter. I didn't reply. I simply opened the banking app again. I watched a pending transaction from a liquor store in Cincinnati try to hit Trent's prepaid card. Declined. I watched a recurring charge for Mom's high-end beauty subscription box attempt to clear. Declined. Then came the voice note. I put my AirPods in and pressed play. My mother's voice filled my head, thick with tears that sounded practiced. Riley, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but this is financial abuse. I am standing in the grocery store parking lot humiliated. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me, I thought? Like taking out a second mortgage on my credit score? Like making me the parent to my own parents? I typed a response, then deleted it. I typed another. You said I wasn't welcome, so neither is my money. Deleted that too. Silence was louder. Silence was the only language they hadn't learned to twist yet. By 5 p.m., the tone had shifted from confusion to rage. Dad, if this isn't fixed by tonight, don't think you can just apologize later. You are crossing a line, young lady. Trent, you're actually psycho. I packed my bag, turned off the lights in my office, and walked to the elevator. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing home to wire money or soothe a crisis. I was going home to a quiet apartment, a glass of wine, and a bank account that was staying exactly where it belonged, with me. But as I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a different kind of notification. It wasn't a text. It was an email from a law firm in Dayton. Subject, Notice of Impending Litigation. 3. Family Assets. I stopped in the middle of the parking garage. They moved fast. They must have called Uncle Jerry, the strip mall lawyer Dad played golf with. I opened the PDF attachment, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. They were accusing me of financial sabotage. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. They wanted to get litigious? They wanted to bring the law into this? Okay, Dad, I whispered, unlocking my car. Let's play. I sat in the driver's seat of my Audi, the engine idling, reading the PDF on my phone for the third time. The letterhead belonged to Henderson and Associates, a strip mall firm in Dayton I recognized immediately. It was the same place my dad went to dispute his speeding tickets. The language was full of bluster, words like fiduciary duty and malicious interference thrown around like confetti. They were demanding I restore access to family assets immediately or face a civil suit for damages. Damages, I scoffed, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. You can't damage what doesn't belong to you. That was the critical error in their calculation. My parents, in their arrogance, had forgotten the specific mechanics of our arrangement. When they ruined their credit scores 5 years ago, I didn't just co-sign for them. I took over. The family credit card? It was a Chase Sapphire Reserve in my name. They were merely authorized users. The emergency fund? It was a high-yield savings account under my Social Security number. The car Trent drove? Leased in my name because no dealership would touch him with a 10-foot pole. Technically, legally, and financially, I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply revoked their privileges. It was no different than a parent taking the keys away from a teenager, except the teenager was a 60-year-old man who thought he was entitled to my paycheck. I put the car in reverse and pulled out of the garage. I wasn't going to respond to the lawyer. I knew that silence was far more terrifying to them than a screaming match. Silence meant I was thinking. Silence meant I wasn't playing their game anymore. By the time I got back to my apartment, the group chat had gone quiet. It was the eerie calm before the storm. I poured a glass of red wine and sat on my balcony looking out at the Columbus skyline. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I being too harsh? It was Thanksgiving after all. Maybe I should just unlock the grocery money. Maybe I should... My phone buzzed. A single message from my dad. I picked it up, expecting another threat or perhaps a demand to call the lawyer. But when I read the text, the glass of wine nearly slipped from my fingers. Dad, don't worry, Darla. If we push hard enough legally, we can get access to her accounts. She won't fight us. She still wants us to love her. We just have to scare her a little." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. He had meant to send it to my mother privately. He had slipped. The world tilted on its axis. She still wants us to love her. It wasn't a guess. It was a strategy. They knew. They knew that for years my compliance wasn't about being a good daughter. It was about a desperate, pathetic need for their approval. They knew I was buying their affection, and they were banking on my emotional starvation to break me. They didn't want the money because they were desperate. They wanted the money because they knew I would pay anything to feel like I belonged. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The flicker of guilt I had felt 2 minutes ago was extinguished, replaced by a cold, obsidian rage. I screenshotted the message. Then I watched the chat bubbles appear. Dad. Message deleted. Too late, Dad. Dad, Riley, that wasn't for you. It was a typo, misunderstanding. I set the phone down on the railing. The doubt was gone. They wanted a fight? They wanted to weaponize my love for them? Fine. But they had forgotten one thing about me. I was the one who fixed their messes. I was the one who read the fine print. And I was the one who was about to burn their entire house of cards to the ground. I didn't block them. That would have been too merciful. I wanted them to see the Reed receipts. I wanted my father to stare at his phone, sweating, knowing I had seen the man behind the curtain before he could pull the drapes shut. Instead of responding to his frantic typo excuses, I opened my laptop and composed a new email. Not to Henderson and Associates, but to Julian Thorne, the toughest corporate litigator I knew in Columbus. We had worked together on a merger last year. He was a shark who ate strip mall lawyers for breakfast. Subject: personal legal matter stars potential fraud. I attached the letter from my parents' lawyer and the screenshot of my father's accidental text. Julian, my family is threatening to sue me for access to accounts legally in my name. They are also admitting to manipulation in writing. I need a cease and desist sent to this firm by morning. Scorch the earth. I hit send. That was the easy part. Handling the business side was second nature. It was the biological side that still felt like a raw wound. I poured a second glass of wine, my hand trembling slightly. I was pacing the living room, the adrenaline making it impossible to sit, when my phone rang again. I glared at it, ready to send it to voicemail, but the name on the screen made me pause. Aunt Caroline. She was my dad's sister, but the black sheep of the family, mostly because she lived in Louisville and refused to lend my parents money years ago. We hadn't spoken in months. I picked up. Hello. Riley. Her voice was a hushed whisper, static crackling on the line like she was huddled in a closet. Are you alone? Yes, Aunt Caroline, what's going on? Did they call you? They're dragging your name through the mud, honey. Your mom is posting on Facebook about how you've abandoned them, but that's not why I'm calling. She paused, and I heard a sharp intake of breath. I heard your dad talking to Trent on speakerphone. They think they have leverage on you. They don't have leverage, I said, eyeing my laptop. I control the accounts. Not the accounts, Riley, the house. I frowned. What about the house? I don't pay the mortgage directly. I just send them the allowance for it. You need to check the county recorder's website, right now. Hamilton County Records. Her voice dropped an octave. 3 years ago, when they refinanced to pay off those credit cards, they couldn't qualify on their own. My stomach dropped. Caroline, what are you saying? I'm saying check the deed, Riley. Look at the guarantor. The line went dead. I rushed back to my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Hamilton County Auditor, property search, last name, Evans. The entry popped up, 1402 Oak Street. I clicked on the history. There it was. A refinancing document filed 3 years ago. I clicked the PDF. It downloaded with agonizing slowness. When it opened, I scrolled past the legal jargon to the signature page. Borrower, Robert Evans, co-borrower, Darla Evans, financial guarantor, Riley Evans. I stared at the screen, the room spinning. There was a signature next to my name. It looked like mine. It had the same loop on the R, the same sharp Y. But I had never signed this. I had never even been in Cincinnati that week. I checked my calendar archives. 3 years ago, October 14th, I was in Chicago for a conference. They had forged my signature. They hadn't just used me for cash. They had committed a felony. They had strapped a $300,000 anchor to my ankle and thrown me into the ocean, all without telling me. If they defaulted on the house, which they definitely would without my monthly allowance, the bank wouldn't just foreclose on them. They would come for my assets, my savings, my investments, everything I had built. I sat back, the wine turning to vinegar in my mouth. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. I stared at the loop on the R. It was terrified and perfect. My mother used to trace my signature on permission slips when I was in high school because she'd forget to sign them before she left for work. Back then, I thought it was resourceful. Now I realized it was practice. I saved the document. Then I saved it again to an external hard drive. Then I emailed it to my encrypted work server. I wasn't taking chances. My phone was still in my hand when I dialed Julian. It was late past 10, but he picked up on the second ring. "Riley, I saw your email," he said, his voice crisp. "I'm drafting the cease and desist now. The text message from your father is a gold mine. We can prove intent to manipulate." "Stop drafting, Julian," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm to my own ears. "It's worse." "How much worse?" "I just pulled the deed to their house. They refinanced 3 years ago. My name is on it as the financial guarantor." Silence stretched on the line. I heard the click of a lighter, then a long exhale. "Did you sign it, Riley?" "I was in Chicago," I said. "I can prove it. Flight records, hotel receipts, conference itinerary. Julian, they forged my signature." "Okay," he said, the shark entering the water. His tone dropped, devoid of any warmth. "Listen to me very carefully. This isn't civil litigation anymore. This is bank fraud. This is identity theft. This is a federal crime. If we report this, your parents aren't just losing the house. They are looking at prison time." The word hung in the air. Prison. I closed my eyes. I saw my dad grilling burgers. I saw my mom teaching me to braid hair. I saw the people they used to be before the entitlement rotted them from the inside out. "I know," I whispered. "What do you want to do?" Julian asked. "I can have the police at their door by breakfast." "No," I said, opening my eyes. "Not yet." "Riley, if I arrest them, I lose everything too. The bank will still try to come for me while the fraud investigation drags on for years. My assets will be frozen. My career will be scrutinized." I walked to the window, looking at the city lights. I need to outsmart them, not just punish them. "You want leverage," Julian surmised. "I want total capitulation. They banned me from Thanksgiving to scare me into compliance because they knew the house was a ticking time bomb. They knew if I stopped paying, the default would hit me too. That's why they were so desperate. So what's the play?" "Let them think they're winning," I said. "Let them think I'm scared of the lawsuit. Let them think I'm breaking." "That's dangerous." "It's the only way to get them to admit it on a recording," I said. "I need them to say they signed it. I need indisputable proof that isn't just handwriting analysis. I need a confession." "Fine," Julian said, "but don't give them a dime." "Oh, I won't." I hung up. As if on cue, my phone lit up. The group chat. "Mom, Riley, honey, please. Your father is beside himself. He didn't mean that text. We're just stressed. We miss you. Please just call us. We can fix this." It was the love bombing phase, the cycle of abuse turning its wheel. Yesterday I was banished. Tonight I was missed. I typed a response, my fingers steady. Me. I'm confused and hurt. I don't know what to think. I hit send. It was the bait. Now I just had to wait for the sharks to swim into the cage. The 3 dots on the screen danced instantly. They were likely huddled around the phone in the kitchen, high-fiving each other. They thought I had cracked. They thought the silence had been too much for me to bear. Mom. Oh, Riley, thank God. Call us immediately. I didn't call immediately. I waited 5 minutes. I walked to my desk, opened a voice recording app on my laptop, and set the microphone sensitivity to high. Then I placed my phone on speaker next to it. I took a deep breath, mentally shedding the skin of the successful CFO and slipping back into the role they preferred, the pliable, guilt-ridden daughter. I dialed. Riley? My mother's voice was breathless. Baby, are you okay? We've been so worried. I don't like fighting, I said, injecting a tremor into my voice that wasn't entirely fake. The adrenaline was making my hands shake. Neither do we, my dad chimed in. He sounded closer now, probably leaning over Mom's shoulder. We just want what's best for the family. We were hurt, Riley. You cut us off cold. I was scared. I lied. And then I got that letter from the lawyer. Dad, the letter said something about the house. It said I'm liable for the assets? I watched the audio waveforms on my laptop spike as I spoke. This was the moment. Well, Dad cleared his throat. That's just legal talk, but yes, technically the house is, well, it's a family asset. We're in this together. But I never signed anything for the house, I said, pressing gently. How can I be liable if I never signed the mortgage? Silence. A beat of static. Riley, look, Dad said, his voice dropping into that condescending register he used when explaining car engines or politics. When we refinanced, we needed a guarantor to get the best rate. We did it for you. It's your inheritance. We handled the paperwork to speed things up. You were busy in Chicago, remember? So, you signed for me? I asked, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was a formality, Mom interjected quickly. We were protecting your future asset. But right now, that asset is in danger because the accounts are frozen. If we miss the payment, the bank comes after you, Riley. That's why we were so angry. You're hurting yourself. I stared at the laptop screen. There it was. We handled the paperwork. You were busy. It wasn't a clean, I forged your signature confession, but it was enough to prove knowledge and intent. They had just admitted to signing legal documents on my behalf without my presence. I see, I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated rather than triumphant. I didn't realize the stakes were that high. I don't want to lose the house. I don't want to ruin my credit. Exactly, Dad said, the relief palpable. So unlock the cards, transfer the funds. We can forget this whole ugly mess happened. I can't just unlock them, I said. The bank flagged the activity as suspicious because of the sudden freeze. I have to verify everything in person. In person? Mom asked. I have to come to Cincinnati, I said. I can bring a cashier's check for the arrears. We can sort it out on Thursday. Thanksgiving? Mom sounded hesitant, then thrilled. You're coming for Thanksgiving? If I'm still invited, I said. I want to fix this. Of course you're invited, Mom cried. Oh, Riley, I'll make the pecan pie. Just get here early. We have a lot to go over. I will, I said. I'll be there. I hung up. I stopped the recording and saved the file as evidence confession 1WAV. They thought I was coming to surrender. They thought I was bringing a check to save them from their own financial incompetence. I looked at my suitcase. I needed to repack. I wasn't packing for a reconciliation. I was packing for an eviction. The drive from Columbus to Cincinnati usually took an hour and a half, but today it felt like a descent into the underworld. The sky was a bruised shade of gray, spitting a mix of rain and sleet against my windshield. On the passenger seat sat a thick manila envelope. Inside wasn't the cashier's check they were expecting. It was a copy of the deed, the transcript of our recorded call, and a frighteningly thick document Julian had drafted overnight titled, Notice of Intent to Partition and Sell. I wasn't just going to dinner. I was going to a foreclosure. I pulled into the driveway of the split-level house on Oak Street just after noon. Smoke was curling from the chimney. It looked idyllic, the picture-perfect American dream, a dream financed by my credit score and maintained by my silence. My dad was waiting on the porch before I even cut the engine. He wore a grill master apron over a sweater I had bought him last Christmas. He jogged down the steps, a look of benevolent forgiveness plastered on his face. "There she is," he boomed, opening my car door. "The prodigal daughter returns." He went for a hug. My body went rigid. I let him wrap his arms around me, smelling the stale scent of old spice and wood smoke. It took every ounce of willpower not to shove him away. "Hey, Dad," I said, my voice tight. "I knew you'd come to your senses," he whispered in my ear, giving my shoulder a squeeze that was a little too hard. "We're family. Money comes and goes, right?" "Right," I said. "It goes." We walked inside. The heat hit me first, then the smell of sage and roasting turkey. It was nauseatingly nostalgic. Mom came rushing out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes darted immediately to my purse. "Riley!" She kissed my cheek, leaving a smear of lipstick. "You made it, and you brought everything?" "It's in the bag," I said, patting my purse. Trent was on the couch watching the Lions game. He didn't even stand up. He just raised a beer in my direction. "Sup, Richie Rich. Glad you decided to stop starving us." "Hello, Trent," I said calmly. "So," Dad rubbed his hands together, his eyes also fixated on my bag. "Why don't we handle the business first? Get the unpleasantness out of the way so we can enjoy the bird?" "I'd actually prefer to wait until after dinner," I said, stepping further into the living room. "I'm exhausted from the drive and I want to just be a family for a bit before we talk numbers." They exchanged a look. A flicker of annoyance crossed Mom's face, but she quickly smoothed it over. They couldn't push me too hard. I was the one holding the checkbook. "Of course," Mom said, her smile tight. "We can wait. Bree will be here any minute. Why don't you help me with the green beans?" I walked into the kitchen, the heart of the house. I looked at the granite countertops I had paid for, the stainless steel fridge I had bought. "So," Mom said, chopping onions with aggressive speed, "did you bring a check or is it a transfer?" "It's a solution," I said, leaning against the counter. "A permanent one?" She smiled, oblivious to the double meaning. "Good, that's all we ever wanted." I watched her, marveling at the audacity. They really thought they had won. They thought I was back in the box. "Yeah," I whispered, "it's all over now." The turkey was dry. I chewed slowly, swallowing the sawdust-textured meat with a sip of the expensive Pinot Noir I had brought, mostly to numb the edges of my patience. Bree had arrived 20 minutes late, breezing in with a new designer handbag that I knew for a fact was purchased on the secondary credit card I had frozen yesterday. She had hugged me with one arm, asking immediately if I had fixed the glitch because her card was declined at Starbucks that morning. "We'll talk about it after pie," I had said, my voice steady. Now we were seated around the dining table, the same table where I had done my homework, where I had cried over breakups, where I had once believed I was loved unconditionally. "So," Trent said, piling a third helping of mashed potatoes onto his plate, "I've got this business idea, drop shipping. Just need a little startup capital for inventory, like $5,000. Since you're flashing cash again, Ree, maybe you could front me." He didn't ask if I was flashing cash. He assumed. "Trent," Dad warned, though his tone lacked any real bite. "Let your sister eat. We can discuss allocations later." Allocations. Like I was a federal grant they were applying for. "It's just $5,000, Trent muttered, spraying crumbs. "She makes that in a week." "Actually," I said, setting my fork down. The metallic clink against the china rang out like a bell. "I don't make that in a week. I make it in 4 days." The table went silent. They stared at me, eyes widening. Greed is a physical look. It dilates the pupils and wets the lips. They didn't hear pride in my voice. They heard opportunity. "Well," Mom said, beaming, "that's wonderful, honey. It just shows that we raised you right. We gave you the foundation to succeed." I looked at her. You gave me a foundation. Of course, she said, pouring gravy. We sacrificed everything for you kids. I looked around the room. The refinancing documents in my bag burned a hole in the floor. They hadn't sacrificed. They had mortgaged. And when they ran out of their own equity, they stole mine. To family, Dad announced, raising his glass, to sticking together through the hard times, and to forgiveness. He looked pointedly at me. To forgiveness, everyone murmured. I raised my glass but didn't drink. I watched them down the wine I paid for, eating the food cooked in the oven I bought, sitting in the house secured by my credit rating. The meal dragged on. Every sentence spoken was a veiled request. Bree needed a new laptop for school. Mom wanted to redo the guest bathroom. Dad mentioned his truck was making a funny noise. They weren't making conversation. They were submitting invoices. Finally, the last plate was cleared. Mom brought out the pecan pie. Okay, Dad said, leaning back and patting his stomach. He fixed his eyes on me, the warmth vanishing instantly. Dinner's over. The bank closes the fraud investigation window tomorrow if we don't verify the funds. Let's see the check, Riley. The air in the room shifted. The pretense of the holiday evaporated. We were back to the transaction. I reached down and picked up the heavy manila envelope. I placed it in the center of the table, right next to the centerpiece. I didn't bring a check, I said softly. Dad's face reddened. What, you said you brought a solution? I did, I said. Open it. Dad snatched the envelope. He ripped it open, expecting, I assumed, cash or a bank draft. Instead, he pulled out the stack of stapled papers. He frowned, adjusting his reading glasses. What is this? Notice of intent to partition? He looked up, confusion warring with a dawning, terrible realization. What is this, Riley? It's the end, I said. Read the second page, Dad, the one with the signature. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a guillotine blade hanging suspended at the top of its track. Dad flipped to the second page. I saw his eyes scan the lines, the loan amount, the terms, and finally, the bottom of the page. His face, usually flushed with wine and bluster, drained of color until it looked like old parchment. Robert? Mom asked, her voice trembling. What is it? He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared at the signature that looked so much like mine. The one he had probably practiced for hours before putting pen to paper 3 years ago. It's a copy of the deed, Mom, I said, taking a sip of water, specifically the refinancing agreement you both signed, and the part where you listed me as the financial guarantor. Mom froze. Her fork clattered onto her plate. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, looking at Dad for a cue. Stop it, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a whip. I know you forged my signature. I know you used my credit to secure this house because yours was trash. And I know you've been terrified that I'd find out. You little witch, Dad whispered. He looked up, his eyes dark with a mixture of fear and fury. You went digging. After everything we do for you. Everything you do for me? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You mean stealing my identity? That's a felony, Dad. Bank fraud. Up to 30 years in federal prison. You wouldn't, Trent scoffed, though he looked unsure. You're not going to send your own parents to jail. Try me, I said, turning my gaze on him. I spoke to my lawyer this morning. We have the flight records proving I was in Chicago the day this was signed. We have a handwriting expert ready to testify. And, I pulled my phone out, I have the recording of our call from 2 nights ago where you admitted to handling the paperwork because I was busy. I tapped the screen. Dad's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. We handled the paperwork to speed things up. The color didn't just leave Dad's face, it left the room. Bree looked like she was going to be sick. Trent slumped back, deflated. So, here is how this works, I said, leaning forward, claiming the power in the room for the first time in my life. The document in front of you is a notice of intent to partition. Since I am on the deed, fraudulently or not, I have a claim to this property. I am forcing a sale." "You can't sell our house," Mom shrieked, tears finally spilling over. "This is our home. Where will we go?" "I don't know," I said calmly. "Maybe you can rent an apartment. One you can actually afford without stealing from me." "Riley, please." Dad's voice cracked. The anger was gone, replaced by desperate bargaining. "We'll lose the equity. We'll lose everything. Just sign a retroactive approval. We can work out a payment plan." "No," I said. "I am done being your bank. I am done being your retirement plan. And I am certainly done being your doormat." I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "You have 30 days to vacate. If you fight me, I hand the fraud evidence to the FBI. If you leave quietly and let the sale proceed, I won't press criminal charges. I'll just take my share of the sale to pay back every cent you've leached off me for the last decade." I looked at their stunned, weeping faces. I felt no guilt, only a profound, weightless sense of freedom. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. I picked up my purse and walked to the door. Behind me, the sound of my mother's sobbing began to rise. But for the first time ever, I didn't turn back. The rain stopped the moment I crossed the city limits, the gray clouds breaking apart to reveal a sliver of cold, bright moon. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. The silence in the car feeling less like emptiness and more like a fresh canvas. I expected the guilt to crush me, but it never came. Instead, I felt lighter. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy a seat at a table where I was the main course. Now, I was building my own table. 3 months later, I sat in a booth at the Guild House in Columbus, watching snow drift past the window. Julian sat across from me, a heavy crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand and a thick envelope on the table between us. "Closing went through this morning," he said, tapping the envelope. "The wire transfer is already in your account, but I thought you'd want the closing statement for your records. It's done." My parents hadn't fought it. The threat of federal prison was a powerful motivator, especially for people who cared so much about appearances. They had vacated the house in 28 days. The sale was rushed, but the market was hot. After the mortgage was paid off, the remaining equity was split. "And them?" I asked, taking a sip of my martini. "They moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Dayton," Julian said. "Trent is working at a warehouse. Bree had to get student loans. They're surviving, but they're not your problem anymore." I nodded slowly. I had blocked their numbers the moment I left the driveway on Thanksgiving. I had changed my email. I had even moved apartments just to be safe. The silence was absolute and it was peaceful. "You know," Julian said, his shark-like demeanor softening into something warmer, something that looked a lot like admiration. "Most people wouldn't have pulled the trigger. They would have folded." "I didn't pull the trigger to hurt them," I said, looking at the check amount on the statement, enough to replace every cent they had drained from me with interest. "I did it to save myself." Julian smiled, raising his glass. "To saving yourself." "To freedom," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. The check settled the score, but the real victory wasn't financial. It was the realization that I didn't need their permission to be whole. I had found a new circle, friends who checked on me without asking for money, a mentor who valued my brain, and maybe, just maybe, a lawyer who looked at me like I was the most formidable woman in the room. I looked out at the city lights, bright and steady in the dark. My family had banned me from Thanksgiving because I stopped paying for their mistakes. They thought it was a punishment, but looking at my life now, solvent, peaceful, and surrounded by people who respected me, I realized the truth. They hadn't banned me. They had set me free. And that was the greatest gift they could have ever given me.